Well, welcome back to Dad's shed, and it's nice to be in here instead of outside and under the car. Right, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, over the last few weeks I've had a little project going on when I've had some time to do it, and it's now fitted to the lathe. And those of you that have seen some of my previous videos may have noticed that there's things now added to it. I decided to put a digital readout system on the lathe. It's not an expensive one. It's the cheapest I could find. It's obviously Chinese. It's come off eBay, where you could actually choose the size of the components you needed. I've gone slightly bigger than I needed on the cross slide reader because I needed to get it out so that there was enough room to fit the read head and to get underneath it to all sorts of things. There have been a couple of compromises made. Because of the size of this, I can get that up to there, that's fine. I can drill in, that's not a major issue. The other little bit is using the top slide or the compound slide. In order to get it round, I will not be able to put a 30 degree or a 27.5 degree cut on to do threading. So what I will need to do is to put it round at 0, which I can get around over the top of this so that I can then add a little bit so it cuts on the leading edge. But fitting something like this is always a bit of a compromise, especially if you're having to go low budget. Now this was, as I said, bought off eBay. I ordered the 2-channel read head or display and a read head for the cross slide and the longitudinal along the bed. It comes with a number of brackets, but not all that you need. So there's a number of things that needed doing to make it fit. A couple of pieces here to fit the cross slide reader on, and down the back, as you'll see in a moment, are some wedge shaped pieces that take the longitudinal reader. They have been made from pieces of EN9 that I had, so it's a very good steel, cut up on the bandsaw and then put on the shaper to both square up and then to cut the angle that I need. So what I did was I took my little Wixie digital angle gauge, I checked that this is at 0, which it is. I did actually level the lathe bed, and then I measured the angle at the back and then took that away from 90 degrees, which gave me an angle of 14.4 degrees out. So I've made these 2 blocks up. What you'll see on the shaper is the first cut's to square it. Then I've turned the vise around to go across because I didn't want to go along because it could push it down. Angled the blocks in there using the Wixie gauge so that the table was zeroed, and then the piece of work put in at 14.4 degrees so I can take the cut across. They've gone in the back and I've measured them once they've gone in and they are accurate. So that's enabled me to put the longitudinal reader in vertically. So what I'm going to do now is, this now works. Let's go and see how it got put on the lathe. Hope you enjoy it. Now this little upgrade involves fitting this scale to the back of the lathe, and thankfully Colchester have provided a machined flat along here for fitting accessories, but it's not flat and square. So as you'll see in a moment, I've had to manufacture these angled blocks that will go on, and I've drilled and tapped it here for 3/16 UNC. Now why, you might ask?
Well, quite simply, everything else on here is UNC. So rather than do it in millimetric, I've decided to keep it consistent. So 3/16 UNC. That one here is just going to be taken off. I've marked it where this scale will sit, and then I'll work out where in that middle of that I'm going to drill a hole to take the holding bolt for that. This is a universal sort of kit, and it comes with these bits and pieces. I've got a single bolt in there at the moment. One of the things, the back of the cross slide of the saddle rather on the Colchester is full of holes for various things. That's where the taper turning attachment will sit. That's 2 holes that will take an arm that will hold a guard. I don't know what these down here are for, so I'm going to use this one here. That will go back as to there, which means it will be just inside the maximum travel of the lathe. It leaves these clear here. I am going to need to cut this down because the cross slide reader will have to sit there. It can't sit anywhere else, and it's too big to fit down these slots, so it's going to have to go further across. It's not ideal, but one of the things I have done is these holes here, I can't find any dimensions for them, but they are quarter UNC there, quarter UNC. That is a 3/16 hole for a dowel pin, the same as that is, but I've put a 3/16 screw in there just to give me a chance to measure out. Quarter inch UNC, quarter inch UNC, 2 more 3/16 there, and another 3 quarters. So what I've actually done is I've drawn this out and I've put it on my CAD to make it a little bit more readable. So I now have the dimensions of the back of the saddle. So I know where the holes are. So I can actually drill out the holes in there to the size I want.
And so to the shaper. This is probably one of my favourite machines in the workshop. It's very relaxing. It's not rapid and gets the load done, but it does the job very nicely. So we've just finished doing one side. We'll flip it over and do the other, but I'm not going to show you all that because it's exactly the same as the last minute you've just watched. So we'll pull it over, tighten it down, and then we'll get it going again. But what I will do, I'll now go on and show you the next bit of work, having squared it up. So I've turned the vise through 90 degrees. I've used my angle gauge to set the top of the block at 14.4, and then I'm taking a cut across there. The reason I've turned the vise is so that it's cutting across the work and not along it, as there's a chance that the tool pushing against the work would push it down if you're going along the length of it, whereas this way it's coming across. It's taking quite a nice large cut. It's about 1.5mm depth of cut. I could go more, but because it's not set square on the base of the vise, I don't want to push my luck over much. But it will go through and just generally generate a flat surface, and that will give me the angle I want on that block. Both blocks were squared up to the same size. Once I've finished the cut, so the end nearest us no longer has the witness mark on it, I'll then measure and check that I've got the same size on both blocks. So that's another angle, and it's getting along quite nicely. One of the nice things about the shaper is that it's actually taking a long time to do it, there's no concern really that it's going to do anything nasty, and it gives time to go and make another cup of tea. So that's coming to the end of the cut. As you can see, the top is now flat, which means it's to a 14.4 degree angle all the way along. Let's just drop it down and take the edge off. Before anyone tells me, yes, I know that's not the right sort of vise for use on a shaper, but it's the one I've actually got. The other one is set up for use on the mill, and it's got tenon blocks in it, whereas that is really a drill vise, but for the sort of work I do, it's sufficient and does hold the work well. So that's the block being cleaned up. It's now angled and ready to go to the back of the machine and then be drilled for fixings. Right, we're in the back here. I've bought some 1024 UNC, basically 3/16 Allen head screws. Unfortunately, they are Chinese, because it seems to be almost impossible to get anything online now that isn't. I've shortened them a little bit. I wasn't exactly sure the size I needed, so I bought them slightly long, on the basis I can always make them shorter, but it's very, very difficult to make them longer. So that will go in there like that. And that will hold quite nicely at that point. And I would say that it looks pretty square. I will check it, but I'm going to go to the other end. Let's give that a quick try and see if that will actually do up as far as I need it to. Yes, so that one I don't need to shorten. Don't know why I needed to shorten that one. It just didn't seem to like the thread going in there. What I have done, when I drilled it out, and I drilled out 4mm, although the recommended size is 3.9, it doesn't need an awful lot of torque on there, so 4mm will give me a little more clearance when I'm tapping. I've only got one tap in that size, so I don't want to break it. So I drilled it out to 4mm. While it was still in the drill and held in the vise, I put the tap in the chuck, pulled it down, and then started the tap using the chuck, not under power but manually, and I then took it out of the chuck with took it out of the vise rather, and over to the bench, and I finished tapping it by hand at the bench. So they have now attached that in there quite nicely. The next little job is that this piece here will go on there, and that will then screw into this piece. And I've got a little bit of wriggle room. I can move that up and down to get it to fit, and I just want that just a little bit off of touching. So that's more or less where we are, and I think what I'm going to do, no I won't, I'll leave that as it is, because that can then roll up I'm thinking about how this cable then rolls out, but actually if I have it along that way it will be fine. It won't be pulling it, it'll be pushing it, so that will be good. Right, so let's do a little bit of fiddling around.
that is basically in place. I've got movement on there, so I can just move it around to get it so that it is as it should be. And in fact, if I reach behind me, I have sitting here my little Wixie angle gauge. So I'll put it on the bed, zero it, so it's now zeroed on the bed. And if I move it onto there and just sit it on there, that says it's 0.3 out, and I'm not sure which way. So let's have a quick undo that a little. That's 4, that's 3. Okay, so that can stay done up. Let's go to this end, loosen that off the shade. And that, according to the Wixie gauge, is now zeroed to the bed. So that's zero, that's zero. So that should now be in line with the bed. I will check it with a dial gauge, but this is pretty accurate, so I'm quite happy with that, at least for an initial setting. And the next one is to make sure that this front face runs parallel to that. If it doesn't, I will pack out with shims either end to get it to sit where I want it. So that's coming along slowly, very slowly. Well, that's the longitudinal scale in place. It has a fairly universal fitting here, which enables you to adjust it around all over the place. I've only got one screw in there currently, but that's going to hold it very, very nicely because it's actually sitting on top of there. I've put washers in here because I'm not convinced they're flat, and at least the washers, and I've let them sit down quite nice and loose while I tightened it, so it's tightened it where it sits, so that should give me a nice smooth travel along. On the actual scale itself, I did measure it. I put a dial gauge both on the top and on the side, and at either end it's reading exactly the same. There is about a 2 thou variation in the middle, about here, where it moves in and out very, very slightly, but I'm not surprised by that. But 2 thou I think we can live with fairly easily. So that's that fitted on. Next thing is to actually try it. To do that, I'm going to put the back on the lathe and then fit the scale up and see if it actually does anything. Well, the rear is now on. What we've got here is an operational rear or longitudinal scale. I haven't checked it yet to make sure it's accurate. I will do that tomorrow because I've got to go out in a few minutes, but that is now working, and that is the key one actually, because until now I've had no way of really telling what the position is of the carriage on the bed. And if I want to go from, say, if I want to go forward an inch, so from there, if I want to go forward an inch to 11 inches, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 inches, I haven't been able to do so, but now I can. And in fact, to within a 1/10 of a thou according to the scale. How much you believe that is up to you. I know how much I believe that, which is not an awful lot. But to be honest, if I can get within a thousandth of an inch on longitudinal travel, I'll be very, very happy. So that's the first scale on. The next one is a bit more awkward because it has to go across here. It won't fit to there, because if I fit it to there, I can't then adjust the angle of the compound slide. So I'm going to need to raise it up a little bit so I can get a spanner underneath and into that slot there, and then work out the traverse. So I've got the bits for that. I just need to start working on how to do it. Well, we're back on the lathe, and I've made a few parts already, but I'm going to go through very quickly what I've done. There are two plates here which this will sit on. I have to do it this way around because I can't put it at the front. It won't fit in the slot there, so I can only set it back here. This is very roughly in place. I've got to alter the size once I've got this fitted, but that's not a problem. So what I've just done is I've made two blocks to go out either side to hold it and support it. This has been cut down from a larger piece of steel. I've cut it on the bandsaw, both across and also lengthways, and then I've put this in the shaper and taken it down to the size I want, and also made it parallel. I've then drilled two holes there, tapping size for 5mm, which is 4.2mm. So, as an aside here, if you're making something, and this may be teaching grandmother to suck eggs, but it was never mentioned in any of my early stuff, if you want two holes which are the same place to match, drill them both tapping size only, drill into the part you want tapping size, open one out to clearance so you can bolt it down once you've tapped the hole, and then you've got a tapping size hole that you can use as a guide, so the part you're making becomes the jig to make sure the holes are aligned properly. I found that out when I drilled my first set of frames for a 5-inch gauge locomotive, and I suddenly realised it would be an awful lot easier if every single hole had been drilled the smallest tapping size, and then I could have used that as the jig to drill through into frame stays and everything else. So what I do now is I always just drill tapping size only, get the holes lined up, put the first one in, bolt it down, and then I've got tapping size holes to use as a jig. So what we're going to do now is, unfortunately, it comes back to one of these in there. That, I think, is very, very slightly out of whack. Why don't I be sensible, John, and use one of these measuring stick things? It's almost spot on, so that will do. Excellent. Let's put a bit more depth in there. I would have preferred to have done this all in UNC to match the original, but I haven't got any low profile UNC screws, and I happen to have sitting here some low profile Torx security screws, 5mm, so that's what I'm using. Like most things, this is being done on a budget. So that's that done there. So I can take these off. I'll go and drill this out now. Clearance size, 5.2mm. And then go through and then use a 10mm slots drill to put the clearance hole for the screw head, and then I'll come back and fit this, and then I can start to think about bolting down this unit. And again, I've got a small problem here that I think I've got an answer to, in that will go in there and is below that top surface. So that will do the job really nicely. I don't want anything sticking up because it's very, very tight underneath the top slide. Right, let's go and drill some holes. Right, we're back. I've drilled the second holes. I'm just tapping through, and I'm using the holes which are now clearance at 5.2mm as a tapping jig to try and make sure I get this as upright as possible. So that's that one done. Let's come over the back here. So there is no real reason why I'm using security screws in here, apart from the fact I actually had them and they didn't cost me anything, and being as nearly everything these days is done to a fairly severe budget, it seemed to be sensible to me to make use of what I've got rather than go out and spend quite a lot of money buying something that I will not need again. Right. Now I have deburred the edges of these. Last Christmas my wife decided to buy me a really useful present. Not that she doesn't buy me really useful things all the time, of course, but she bought me one of these, which is a shiv or shaviv deburrer. Absolutely fabulous piece of kit. You just put it over the edge and run it along, or on the inside, and not very expensive. I was really impressed by it, to be honest. I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. Right, they're in there. They're nice and secure. That now needs to sit over there. Then I need to mark for the securing screws. If I can do it with a pen I will, but I'm not 100% certain the pen will go that far down, or will it? No, pen won't do it, so it's going to have to be, although I can actually mark it up from measurement, which will be good because that is about 5mm over, a couple of mil over at either end, and I've got a little bit of play in this, not a lot, but a little bit. So mark these up, take those off, drill them, tap them, and then I can secure this down. And then we're in a reasonably good position. What I will do, of course, you've got some clearance on these things, so having got this down, I will then run a gauge along the edge here to make sure that this is parallel to the travel of the cross slide. Then I'll adapt this plate even more so that it sits in the right place to run this. I'm actually going to flip it over and run it the other way, but that should be where I need it to be. So I've got to move this in by about 7 or 8 mil, but I'll do that at the other side. Right, let's crack on. Right, we're over at the drill press. This is my main drill. I'm fortunate enough to have a couple, but this is the main one I use. And I've got this little cross vise on it, which is quite useful. Apart from that, you need to tighten it down so that it doesn't jump around. But for actually getting it lined up, it'd be even better if I put the drill bit in the centre of the chuck and not grab it off centre. That's it. Okay, let's go down the middle. Right, drill clear through. Happy with that. So I'll now move on. Put the tap in here. I am not going to power tap, but I want to make sure it goes in nicely, so I've got a taper tap in here. I'll just put that in there. Okay, so I've got that started. So I can now take the work out of there, put it over on the bench in the vise, and then just finish tapping that through. And then I'll do the same with the other one. That's where I'm quite fortunate. I actually went out a number of years ago, and I'll show you what I've got. I found this at a steam rally. It's a Dan Croy optical centre punch, and it's worth its weight in gold. It really is a fabulous piece of equipment. But I'll now go over to the vise and just tap this. Right, I've put these on. I've done a quick scan along the top here. That is running parallel, according to my gauge, to within 0.02 of a mil. So I'm now going along this way, trying to make sure it's parallel to the travel. Now there's obviously a slight bend in the bow in the middle of this aluminium, and it moves by 0.03 of a millimetre from the middle to the end, but the two ends are identical. So I'm going to say that that is straight and parallel on there. Obviously a little bit of adjustment. That's tabbed down. They're not very tight. They don't need to be. So that's just holding it in place. It's tight enough it won't move. I don't like over tightening stuff. The next one is to try and get this plate, which should be square, that isn't to be square. So I'm going to take this off. Put that somewhere where it will use its magnetism to prevent it falling on the floor. And have a bit of a play with this little plate underneath here, which is quite considerably out of line. Now if I put that in there, zip that across like that. Right, that's nice and secure, and it's keeping that square. So hopefully if I come around the back here, spin that around a little bit, and this one can go up onto that. I then do that. Oh, I have now got both axes. Take that up a little bit. Both axes on this operational. Excellent. Try and decide whether I need to put that across here. I think I probably do, but I'm going to need to cut it to make sure it just fits properly. Because there's no room to put it the way round it's supposed to go, and that's not a lot of use. So what I think I'm going to do is take that off and modify it. The one at the back also needs a bit of modification to fit properly, but I'm going to call that a success. The next job is to go onto this and set up the settings on it for the scales I've got, because it's variable. These are 5 micron scales, so I need to tell it that's what it's got. So that means going and looking through the booklet that came with it. It'll be interesting to see how these go. This has been done on a tight budget. The money I saved, the work I did on the car, some of that went to buying the scales and the reader. It's a cheap purchase from eBay. They're Chinese. They're not expensive Chinese either, so I'm not expecting great things from them, but it'll be better than guessing at it and trying to make this scale on here work on imperial as well as metric, and it'll be interesting. And on this at the moment you can swap between that's millimeters. That's inch. So that makes life a little bit easier. Doesn't actually indicate which is which, to be honest, which is a bit of a pain, but I'll have to try and remember. Right, that's that little job done. Almost complete. This actually whole lathe needs a repaint, as you can see. It came here in that colour, which is dreadful. That was the house colour at Matchbox. I'm going to paint it in a grey, so I'm going to need to rub it down, fill in some of the holes, repaint it, put new oilers in. I'll repaint this as well. But when I do that, I'll paint up these brackets I've put on here so that they all match in. But I'm quite happy with that. It's doing the job it's supposed to do. We'll have to see how it works over the next few months. Many thanks, guys. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.